Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at creating rooms similar to how Jackbox and other party games do it. The way that it works is you have one person who is the owner of the game. They've purchased it, they have the ability to start rooms with other people, and then everyone can join those rooms using the 4-letter code. So we're going to be generating a 4-letter alphanumeric code for each room. You'll then be able to redirect the players to that room. They can set their name as they join, and yeah, we can just go through the workflow real quick. If you're not familiar, this is what like Jackbox TV's homepage looks like. It's pretty simple. Now, because I don't have a game itself, the way that I'm going to be doing this is if you're a logged in user in the application, you'll have the ability to generate these room codes. So I'll just say dean@example.com with a password of password, and now I have the ability to click start a new game just like I would on like my Xbox or whatever. I'd click that and then a room code is generated. You'll see right here, this is what it looks like. And now as the creator of the game, I can just click start and it'll use my email if I'm playing it in app. And it takes us to /room/whatever, AQG1 or whatever. Now, if I'm a guest and I want to go play the game with this person, I can go over to either the URL itself, or I can just go to localhost port 3000, put the name in, or put the code in, and then set my name as like Dean, for example, click play, and that'll take me to this page. You'll see that the name is persisting here, even though the user hasn't logged in, because we're storing this as a session. So if I come in here and I like remove the cookie, for example, that causes me to no longer have a name. And the way you could handle it is if someone's in here without a name, maybe they're just a viewer, or maybe they have to go back to the home page. We're not really handling the case of like expiring the rooms or dealing with viewers, but the way that you would probably want to do that is have like a WebSocket open, and then as more and more viewers join, the WebSocket updates the viewer count or something, and then the viewers can like vote or whatever. This is just sort of like the first step in the process, which is creating the rooms. So to get started, we'll go ahead, we'll stop the server. I'll scroll in a bit. I'll hit F11 actually, and we can CD out of here. We'll do a Rails new video. We'll do a -J of ESBuild and a -C of Bootstrap. We're of course using Ruby on Rails for this because we value our time, not our sanity. So that'll take us to a new application, and the only gem or dependencies we're going to be using are going to be the friendly ID gem for generating those slugs. We're going to have the devise gem for logging in the user to like prove ownership or whatever. And then we're going to have to use the foreman gem, I guess, because that comes with like the ESBuild that's bundled with Rails by default. So to get started, let's CD into our video app, run a code dot, move this over here so we can see what we're doing. And then we'll come over here and take a look at this. So first thing, we'll come into our gem file, scroll down to the bottom, I'll hit Control+ a couple times so you can actually see what I'm doing. And then in our gem file, we want to add all of those gems, which are going to look a little bit like this. So we have our devise gem, we have the foreman gem, which we need to add because I'm on Ruby 3.2. I don't have the update yet for foreman, so I have to manually add the main version of it from the GitHub branch. I then add friendly ID and simple form just to have a fancier looking form. Once all of that's done, we can run a bundle command to install these gems. It'll take a little bit extra for the foreman. And now we can go ahead and get started. So we're going to do a Rails G devise :install command. This will install devise. You can then do a Rails G devise user command to generate our user model. We can then do a Rails G simple_form :install -- bootstrap to install the simple form, where it gives all of our forms the bootstrap styling. Now we can do a Rails G devise :views command to generate our views. Those should now have simple form styling, as we can see right here. So that's pretty cool. Now that we have all of that, the next step is to think about what our rooms are going to look like. Now, because I already have these migrations here, it's kind of a bit contrived with how I'm going to do this, but we're going to do a scaffold. I'll say Rails G scaffold for the room, and we'll give each room just a name. Now, after this, we're going to add the friendly ID integration. The friendly ID integration requires us to generate a migration as well as generate the friendly ID stuff. So if we come over to the friendly ID GitHub, we can scroll down a bit. It tells us to add the gem, run a bundle install, and then it tells us to generate our migration. So in this case, it wants us to do a Rails G migration add slug to rooms where slug is a unique. Go ahead and run that. And now we can do a Rails G friendly underscore ID to generate that migration. And now we can do a Rails DB :migrate command to migrate our database. So that's done. The next step is going to be to generate a controller for our home page. So for this, we'll just do a Rails G controller pages with a home action. Takes care of that. Now let's come over to the side panel over here, scroll up, go into app models and the room.rb model. Now, if you were so inclined, you could make a room belong to a user. I would just look up like a one-to-many relationship tutorial. Basic idea is you have a belongs to in here, which is a room or a user, and then your user will have many rooms. We're not going to be doing that here, but that might be a good way to just like have a user see how many active rooms they have and maybe do some cleanup and assign like who the session host is or whatever. But in the room itself, the way that we generate these slugs, we start by extending friendly ID. And then instead of just using the friendly ID slugs, which will go based off of name, we're going to set these to have a friendly ID for slug candidates, and then we're going to use slugged. Now this method is not going to work 100% of the time. I mean, neither does like Jackbox's solution. But here what we're effectively doing is we're just checking, we're setting in attempts to 0, a length to 4. We generate a secure random. That of course comes from something like this require secure random. Then we say generate a 4-character long alphanumeric from secure random, which will give us that letter and number combination. We then say while a room where this slug exists, we increment the attempts. We increment the slug length if our attempts are greater than 10. Then we set attempts back to 0 and we repeat. So in theory, this would just cause us to like increment to a 5-digit number if we ever got to that point, if we had like 10 collisions. And then once we get down here, we generate a slug. Now there's going to be a case where you're going to have some race conditions here. I didn't really handle those, but I can sort of show you what those would look like. So friendly ID, if it runs into a situation where we like return a slug where like the thing already exists, we can come into, I don't know, our test and our models and our room test in here, for example, and we could do something like, let me just do this. We can say test should generate a unique slug. And then in here we can say number of slugs equals, let's say 1,000. And then we'll come down here. We'll say number of slugs dot times do. And then in here we can do a room equals room dot new. We can then say, well, I guess we don't need to call the room candidates. I don't know why it's doing that. Let me get rid of this. So we do a room.new. We can then do a room.name equals test, and then a room.save. And maybe we want to do some setup up here where we say setup do. So before every one of these methods, let's do a room.destroy all. And then we can come down here outside of our number of slugs. We can put the, well, let's do a room.all.order. I'm sort of like, you know, just making this up as I go. Order by ascending each do room. Come down here. What's the room slug? And then down here we can do an assert equals the number of slugs is equal to, oops, the room count. Something like that. And then if you wanted to, you could also do another test here to just quickly say test that you can, I don't know, should generate a slug. And then we can do a room equals room.new, room.name equals test, room.save, and then assert that the room slug is not nil. Now we do need to come into our fixtures, and in our rooms fixture, I mean, we can just delete these for now. We can also delete the users, and then that should work. So now let's try to do a Rails. It's going to be Rails test, and then you're going to want to go into test/models/room test, I believe. And then we can go ahead and run that and see what happens. So our first test passes, and the second test also passes. And here we can see what all of those slugs look like in a sorted order. Now, unfortunately, I'm not seeing a whole bunch of collisions here. So let's show you what happens if we crank this number up a bit. I'm going to come back over to our room test and change this to 10,000. We can then go ahead and run our test again. Let me hit Control L, then run this. And then this should hopefully generate some more collisions for us. And of course, if you're running these tests, they always show you how to run the same seed over and over again if you're so inclined. But that's ultimately going to depend on how you are doing your random number generation or your random character generation. I think in this case, because we're using secure random, this might cause it to not quite work like that. Now, if I'm going to scroll up here, hopefully, there we go. I should be able to find a collision. So right here, we can see that it didn't have time to check if this already existed before it created another one. And then it sort of took over. So this is a case where you'd want to like lock the database or something and make sure that that doesn't happen. But I think for now, it's probably fine. We're not expecting that many users. That feels like a future optimization. But okay, we now have our rooms working. We can close all of these. We can come over here. The next step is going to be to, I guess, create our homepage and set up that logic. So let's come into our pages and our homepage. All right, so in here, we're just going to quickly create a login and logout flow. Let me just full screen this. We have our current user, our content tag, and a link to log out. The content tag is just an H3 that tells you what the user's email is. Let me put a space here because this is going to drive me nuts. Else we just create the login and the sign up buttons. The next thing we can do is down here, we can do a check to see if we are the current user again. Obviously we could refactor this a bit to maybe have this appear only in here, like this maybe. So it tells you this is your current user, etc. Maybe something like that. But then you would still want the turbo frame tag down here, I would imagine. So we'll do something like this. The final step here is going to be to do a simple form for our play game as or join game button. And the way that we do this is we create a simple form for the room with a URL of the play_path where we pass in an empty slug. We then say, here's your input for the slug with a placeholder that I just tried to copy as much as possible from Jackbox TV. So we just have enter 4-letter code with the name of slug. We then have a placeholder to enter your name with a max length of 12, which I believe also came from here. And then we have the submit button. Now we do need to create this partial, this room code partial. So let's come over to our side panel. It looks like I put that in the pages folder, new file, new file. And we'll just say this is _room_code.html.erb. Now the room code was pretty simple. It's basically just a bunch of bootstrap styling. So we just start by checking if the room is present, which means do we have a room? If we don't, we just don't show anything. If we do have a room, we then just create a deflex, justify content center, which is how we center our div. We then give it a card with a MX of auto and a custom width and height here just to sort of cause it to look a little bit more like a card of sorts. And then we just tell it, here's your room code as your title. And then in the body, it just prints out the room as a slug to uppercase. So that causes it to be uppercase for the letters. Tells you how to share the code and play the game together. And then it has a button to start the game with the room path. So this will take you to the show action. In the case of the home page with this, it'll take us to a play path. Now the play path is just a way for you to set up some additional logic if you'd like. I'm gonna come into the routes so that we can, like, let's say set the session or stuff like that, or maybe it's additional stuff to what the owner of the game might go through. Optionally, of course. You could just make this go to like the show page if you wanted to. So we post to the play path right here in our rooms controller. So let's come up to our controllers and our rooms controller. And in our rooms controller down here, we have the set room and we have the bottom of the destroy method. So basically all we want to do here is first in our set room, we have to change this to be a .friendly.find because we're using friendly ID. And then up here, we can create another method or another action below destroy where we just say, this is your play action. In here, we do an @room with the room friendly.find. But here, because of how we're creating this, the param in the home page is coming through as a room, but our slug is inside of there in the slug path. So we do a room.friendly.find params room and then slug. And then we have to do it to downcase because we're not using the fancy new feature from, I think, Rails 7.1 which allows you to do like a normalize. The way the normalize works is it just causes it to always be downcased. But we can then say, here's your session player. So this is where you do your cookie stuff. So you just set a session and say, all right, as long as you have this, you're set to the player name. If you wanted to then reset this, for example, you could do something where you just like, I don't know, reset the session, for example. And then in here, you could do like a player underscore name is equal to nil, for example. And then if the session player name dot nil, then you would like redirect or maybe just make them a viewer, right? In this case, we're just doing it like this. So we set the player name and then we redirect to the room URL, which is our show page with the room that we grabbed right here. And that allows us to redirect there. So now if we come over here, let me do a bin/dev. It'll tell me to migrate my database. If I go to localhost port 3000, hopefully if Brave decides to work, it doesn't tell me to do it here. In our routes, let's set the root of the application to be the pages controller and the home action, just like that. Now it should hopefully tell me to, I guess I already migrated. So we'll go over to sign up. I'll do dean@example.com. I'll hit F11 as well. And actually, while we're doing this, we'll come into our, let's come into our layouts and our application.html.erb. Let's just wrap everything in the app with a .container.mt-5 like that. Just so it looks a bit better, I'll copy my email and refresh. There we go. So now we can do a password and a password. Now there's tutorials online for how to fix devise, but out of the box, it doesn't work with Turbo yet. So instead what we do is we just come back, we log in because it does create the account. It just doesn't finish with the sign up. We log in and now we can come over to here. So the first thing that we have is the start game button. If we're trying to do a new game path isn't working. So in our routes, we have to create that. This is just going to be another post, and it's going to be a post to new game, which takes us to the room's new game action. So we can go ahead and save that. Let's refresh. And now we have the start a new game button. So if we click this, somewhere we should see, let me come down here and hopefully scroll up a bit. It should tell us that it failed to do it because new game, the action new game was not found in Rooms controller. So let's come into our Rooms controller. And again, this is another one of those things where we need to create a custom action. So for the new game action, so the play is if you're joining a session, the new game is if you're creating one. Say def new game. In here, what we want to do is call a room create. So @room equals room create. This is also where you could do something where you'd set the @room.user equals current_user if we had that set up, which honestly, at this point, we could just go set up real quick. So in our room, we say this is going to belong to a user. And then for a user, it's going to has many rooms. And we'll say these are dependent destroy. We can then come to our console, stop the server, hit F11, hit Control L. We can in here do a real quick Rails G migration, add rooms to, add user to rooms, and we'll say user_ID, or let's just do user:references. That'll set it up for us with the belongs to. We can then do a Rails DB:migrate command. And then we can do a bin/dev just like that. Let's come over here. Let's refresh. And now if we come back over to our rooms controller, what we can do is we can say, if we're in here for the new game action, we'll say before action, new game. Actually, what we want to do is we want to do a before action to authenticate the user only for the new game, not for the play. So if we're in the new game action, we want to authenticate the user before we get there. That way we're guaranteed to have a current user, so we can set it to be the room user. After we do that, we've now created the room. Well, sort of. We need to do a room.new @room.user equals current user @room.save. There we go. Now what we'll do is we will render a turbo stream. This is a Rails 7 feature. It allows us to do some stuff in real time without needing to refresh. So first things first, our turbo stream here needs to be a update. I'll scroll down a bit and hit Control plus one more time. It needs to be an update. The thing we're targeting is going to be a room code. So if we come over to our home page real quick, we should hopefully have a turbo frame tag that has room code in quotes, which wraps around our page's room partial. And this takes in a room. So this room code right here is what we're targeting as an update. So it'll replace what's in here with whatever we tell it to. So we have a room code. The thing we want to replace it with, this is going to be a pages and then room code. And then the local is going to be the room. So instead of this being a empty room nil, it's now going to actually have a room, which means inside of our room code partial, we can see a room is now present, which causes this card to be displayed. So we can come back to our rooms controller. I'll hit F11 and refresh. I'll hit F11 here to full screen and click start a new game. And I can come into our room class and clean this up a bit because I seem to have had a typo. So in our room right here, this needs to be a belongs to a user, not a belong to. Let's come over here. Let's hit F11 again and click start a new game. Here it tells us our room code is IHMW. We then send it to someone. So we'll click start game here. This will redirect us to that game. Now I'll hit Control Shift N to open up an incognito. If we come over here, we can paste in our code, put a name in here. I'll just put the name as John Doe and we'll click play. That takes us to this room, but we don't have our name displaying. So let's come into our views and our rooms and our room partial. Inside of a room partial, this is the last step. We just want to, above the name, or I guess let's just change this to have the slug and do the room.slug, something like this. We'll do slug : right here. Above this, we can just create something like this, where we say if we are the current user, we want to say the player name is the current user.email, for example. Else, we want to say the session player _ name is our name. So let's go ahead and let's save that. Come over here and refresh. We now have our player name of our email and our player name of John Doe. And you see that even persisted without it being on the page first. So that's sort of how the sessions work. Now we can come over here to our cookies, remove our cookies, refresh the page, and John is now gone. And at this point, we would probably want to redirect or something, or maybe change them to a viewer rather than a participant. But yeah, that's essentially how you could set up something like this. You would then need like a background job to go through and clean these rooms up over time so that they are still available, because of course, as you create more and more rooms, you'll run into more and more collisions. So you'd want some sort of background process running to clean those up, I'd imagine, so that if they're stale for 30 minutes, they then get deleted. But yeah, hopefully this was interesting, hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully I will see you in the next tutorial.